question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak to this particular bill. It is a bill that Labor supports. It is an omnibus bill. It deals with authorisations, transfers and validation of matters relating to reserve lands, Crown land and other lands that are being held for public or private purposes. The critical question that has to be asked, even at this late stage of the debate, Mr Speaker, is why this bill has taken 7 years, the entire length of this government's tenure in office, to pass through the House. The minister that introduced this bill, Mr Speaker, is the gentleman sitting to my right, the Honourable David Parker. He was 7 years younger, though he's aged particularly well. And he pointed out that there are children in my electorate that have been at school for several years that weren't born at the time that this bill was introduced. So, at the very least, Mr Speaker, the next National Speaker, instead of mumbling some inanities like David Bennett did, at least should explain to the House, or the Minister should have explained to the House, why there has been the delay in this bill. This bill is, for the most part, non-controversial. There were 1 or 2 clauses in it, two of which have been dropped, which I applaud in relation to volcanic cones. But largely, the bill was non-controversial, but it was important to certain communities. David Parker talks about the area known as Forester Heights in the Oamaru region. And this bill was necessary so that the Waitaki District Council could go ahead with the sale of land that it had entered into contracts with buyers for, not knowing that an incompetent government would take 7 years to pass this legislation. Now, the result of that, Mr Speaker, was twofold. Firstly, the contracts were voided, and I understand from my colleague that that cost the Waitaki District Council some millions of dollars. So this government is responsible for loading on to a small local authority the cost of its incompetence. And then the measures were finally passed by the local member bringing in a local bill. Now, the time and the money that it cost to pass that local bill could have been invested in getting this bill through, but this government that has no money to meet some of the pressing social needs of this country was prepared to squander it on its own incompetence in failing to get legislation through in a timely manner, sir. There are a number of things here where the bill passes legislative change that are of benefit to local communities. And given that is the case, again, you have to ask why the government did not organise its legislative program so that these uncontroversial measures could have been passed through into law. Why, for example, has the government made the Dunedin City Council wait 7 years to regularise a long-term lease for the use of reserve land by the Port Chalmers Bowling Club, sir? It's prolonged by that period of time the uncertainty that that club faces by not having the ability to have that land passed to it. Why is it delayed allowing the Nelson Marlborough District Health Board to make more effective use of 5 blocks of land for which it held the title at the expense of being able to provide health and disability services utilising that land? Another cost to another small community caused by one thing: the incompetence of successive ministers and this national government in getting the legislation through in a timely way. Why in Northland did it delay passing to the trustees of a Maori reservation adjoining reserve land in the Mahine Pua Bay? Why was that Maori trust forced to wait for 7 years to have the land passed to it when everybody in the community supported that land. Mr. Speaker, generally the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Bills deal only with non-controversial matters, but there were some issues that excited a degree of controversy. One of them was in relation to land in Albert Park. Now, as a former student at Auckland University, I have a particular affection for Albert Park, sir. Yeah, I'm not going to go into details of that. It's a beautiful.
Order.
Yeah. The member in the chair knows well from his own experience, Mr. Speaker. But I've got to say, it's a truly beautiful piece of land. It's in the heart of Auckland City. It's extensively utilised by Auckland University and now by the Auckland University of Technology. And generally, I would be absolutely opposed to passing across the title of such an important park or part of that park for the use for another purpose. And most of the submissions, sir, to the committee, and we're talking now about, I think about July 2009 that the committee heard these submissions. Some of the submitters will no longer be on this earth. Mr. Speaker, most of the submissions were against that. But I've got to say that there are exceptional circumstances here. I don't think that the process followed by the then council was as good as it needed to be. But the fact is that the land that was passed across was a very small piece of land on the fringe of the reserve, and it was passed across to the Auckland Art Gallery. Now, one of the most beautiful buildings in Auckland and indeed in New Zealand is the Auckland Art Gallery, dating back to the 19th century. And I've got to give credit for those that designed an extension of that art gallery, a new modern wing to the art gallery, but as aesthetically pleasing in a very modern form as the heritage building was in the form that it was created based on a French chateau. And it has won international awards, as my colleague has said. It's something that we as Aucklanders are incredibly proud of. It has not taken away it is not detracted from the effective utilisation of Albert Park. In fact, the nature of the building, sited on the edge of the park, is probably something that enhances the value of the park and certainly the public amenity. So I support the recommendations of the committee. In fact, the building is in place. It's been in place for many years, so it is simply acknowledging a fait accompli. I sympathise with those submitters who, perhaps as a matter of principle, said we ought to be extraordinarily cautious about utilising our parkland, particularly a park like Albert Park, for another purpose. But in this case, sir, I think that the use is warranted. I want to finally, sir, touch upon volcanic cones, and the bill as introduced to the House and that went to the Select Committee proposed amending the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Act so that decision-making powers in relation to excavations on private land adjoining or abutting public reserves containing Auckland's volcanic cones would be dealt with by the Minister of Conservation rather than by order of council through the Governor-General. The rationale for this, sir, was that it was inefficient for the Governor-General to be required to make minor amendments. But I think that the Select Committee quite rightly rejected clauses 10 and 11 of this bill and said that the status quo should remain. And they said that the present system was preferable to giving sole power to the department or to the minister, and that the status quo should be maintained until a review seeking means of protecting the cones in perpetuity can be carried out. I've got to say I have a particular affection for the maunga, the volcanic cones in the Auckland area. They are historically important, they are important to the tangata whenua, they are important aesthetically, they are important as areas of recreation. And in my own electorate, I was brought up in the Three Kings area and I have my electorate office there. 2 of those kings have been decapitated, absolutely decapitated. We would not do that again. They were used for quarrying purposes. More recently, the New Zealand Transport Authority, in its wisdom, was going to carve out the side of Puketapapa, Mount Roskill, to put State Highway 20 through. Fortunately, the Volcanic Cone Society, the local board and local people stopped that happening. But this emphasises the wisdom of the committee's decision, and we should delete those, and we have deleted those clauses, but we need to focus on the need to provide protection for an incredibly important part of Auckland's heritage.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.